Good morning, everybody. Boy, I feel much more loose now. Thank you very much. My name is Rabideau. I'm the academic director for the iTEP exam. If you're not familiar with iTEP, it's the International Test of English Proficiency. I'm sure you're familiar with TOEFL or IELTS or some of these other ones. If you're not familiar with us, we're one of their competitors that basically came around after our two founders, 30 years in the international education industry, realized that there's a lot of things that could be improved. And it also relates to you in a lot of ways because there's a few different ways that we are integrated within the recruitment process, which I will talk about today, and some different best practices in not only recruitment but also in proficiency testing and how they go hand in hand. So just to give you a brief history of the testing industry, it wasn't until the late 60s that there was any sort of English proficiency test that was required for for admissions into U.S. colleges. And when it did finally come around, it was a limited version of the test. It was mainly reading, sometimes grammar. It did not include speaking, did not include writing sections, and rarely did it include a listening section. So things have come from no test to a paper version of a test that the model that came out in the late 60s hasn't really altered that much, even though all the technological changes that we've undergone over the past 50 years. One thing was the absence of competition. The name that I gave you is obviously one that everybody knows, and the absence of competition led the exams to become more and more expensive, but not only that, but still today not very convenient, and sometimes, depending on which country you live in, you can't even schedule to sit down for the test for 9 months to a year in advance. So these were a couple of the things that led the two founders of our company, iTEP, to design this new system that we have, the International Test of English Proficiency. Perry Aikens was the president of ELS for 30 years, which obviously gave him a lot of insight into the ins and outs of the international education industry. In that time, they enrolled over 500,000 international students, so he knows something about bringing students over to the U.S. Sharif Osiron is the other founder who really also saw a niche in the industry. So in the early 2000s, they formed the company that owns iTEP, which is Boston Educational Services, to create a new assessment that would have all of the best practices and fix all of the things that had been the original test that came out in the late 60s. They've gone through slight improvements, and they saw a large room for improvement. So they designed a test that had to have certain parameters in order to meet the needs of the industry. So one thing, that the new test had to obviously be a quality exam. So we hired the same test developers that wrote for SAT, TOEFL, and some of the leading test developers in the country. One of the main things is that we are in the 21st century, that it needs to be a lot more convenient to be able to schedule a test. That if it's paper-based, then understandably you should have it scheduled at certain times of the year, but if you're doing it online, you don't need a specific form of a test. You can just draw items off and have it even more secure and a more reliable test for admissions purposes. The other thing is the other tests did become more and more expensive, so it needed to be affordably priced, and it needs to be fully internet-based. Furthermore, it needs to be at secure test sites, and so not just the test site, but the test itself needs to be secure, which pretty much every test has had some sort of issue with. Whether or not it's been saved onto a cache proxy server or whatever the issue happens to be, there's different ways to try and get around taking the test in an honest way. The assessment needs to include all the different skills, all the different language skills, including speaking, including writing, and all the things that are going to be involved in a setting at a university. It needs to be graded within 5 days or less. Something that our competition usually spends 2 to 3 weeks, which kind of spreading out this whole application process over a year's time, doesn't suit us for the 21st century. And then also, if you are an institution that would like to use the test on site for your own purposes, if you have an intensive English program, for example, then you should be able to have immediate access to those results. Or if you're just applying to the school, that the results should be able to be sent immediately to the institution or within 5 days for the grading of the reading, the writing, and the speaking. So when this test was launched back in 2007, there was two versions: the academic version, which is for universities and colleges, and the business version, obviously for businesses. And now we have a third version, which is the SLATE exam, which is for the secondary level for high schools and middle schools. One thing is the other tests, they usually take about 3.5 to 4.5 hours to complete. And our full exam, the plus exam, takes 90 minutes, and then the shortened core exam takes 60 minutes. The 90-minute version includes speaking and writing sections. And the 60-minute version is more of a placement exam, something that only includes reading, listening, and grammar. And then to maximize the affordability for test takers, the prices have been set well below those of the other exams. These, as I'll explain in a moment, is how it relates to the recruitment process, having it affordable and having it convenient, having it on demand, getting the results quickly, all relate closely to recruitment of qualified students. So just a quick little rundown of the recognition that iTEP has enjoyed over the past few years. Is now there's over 300 universities that accept it. Over 100,000 exams have been administered. The Ministry of Commerce and Tourism in Colombia has selected iTEP to be the official exam for the Colombian government, so we've administered 30,000 there. The Ministry of Labor in Saudi Arabia, as well as the Saudi Arabian Cultural Mission, we work closely with, and so we've administered just in the past few years 15,000 exams there. We've been recognized by the California State University system as one of the few exams that's considered to be accredited for English proficiency assessment. And then finally, basically the accrediting council and all of the different organizations have recognized a very small, maybe a handful of exams to say, this is a quality exam, this is certainly proof of English proficiency, so this is an acceptable exam according to the quality of, based on the quality of the exam. So how this relates to community colleges is that community colleges are becoming more and more globally engaged. And a lot of times their international department is just starting up from the beginning, and it becomes difficult to start to get momentum going in that direction. So one thing that iTEP does is it lowers the admission barriers because of the cost and the scheduling flexibility, but it does not lower the admission standards. Essentially, by allowing a qualified student who would be easily get a J1 or an F1 visa, but they can't sit for an exam, or they're too late, or they have to wait another year, that just by having it affordable, having it convenient, and not only that, but we also will sometimes assign agents as test centers. So if you're working with a specific agent in a rural part of a specific country, then once we've vetted that agent, then it's a win-win situation for everybody that we'll assign them to become a test center so that they can compress that whole application process, and thereby increasing the number of qualified applicants. So if you have somebody that has a pool of students and they can compress that time down, have them take the test right there at the same time as they're applying for their visa, then it just streamlines the whole process. It's a win for the test center. They make, or for your agent, they make profit off of each one of the tests they administer. It's better for you because you have a student or somebody that you work with, and you can just say, just go to this test center, take the test, and then the application can be on its way. And obviously, it's good for us as well because we like to spread the amount of test centers throughout the world as much as possible. Not only that, but we promote all of the schools that we work with. So the 300 universities that we work with, we're actively promoting them not only on our website, but in each of the 150 some odd test centers that are public test centers throughout the world. So we have 30-some test centers in China, a number in Saudi Arabia, and a total of 38 countries. So we're spread pretty well globally. And like I say, if you have an agent that you're working with or somebody that you're thinking of working with, if they can prove that they have a reliable and a secure test site, and we can just appoint them to become a test center, and then the whole application process can take place in the same building. On-site administration. Now this is, the bottom two are more related to if you have a program where you wanted to test your students for placement once they arrive on campus, or if you have an ESL program that you could actually, without being a public test center, just test your students on campus. And you could send them to the test center, and they could take the 60-minute version of the exam, for example, and you'll have the results as soon as the test is finished. So you can schedule it on demand. You can have one student come in at one time, and a half hour later another student come in, You could have two students sitting at the exact same time, and they'll get two completely different tests. So all the items are streamed live so that you can just administer the test as convenient as it is for you, and then you get the results immediately. That's basically my spiel right there. I have left some booklets on the table. There's some here. I don't know if you guys have access to it, but there's a wealth of information here that shows, for example, an equivalency chart. So this just shows the way that our scores line up with our competitors. And one thing that we know from having done this for 5 years and constantly doing it is that these other tests that take a long time, take most of the day, that our scores have consistently lined up with them. So the equivalency is something that can be trusted there. High quality exam. Let me think what else I was going to mention. But you can look through there. I'd be very happy to visit with you. I'm also at the vendors area there. So I'd be happy to visit with you there and talk to you more about the exam. I can have a card. I can give you a flashlight, or visit with you about any of this information that I have here. I don't know if there's enough. I have more at the other table there. And that is basically what I came to talk about. I would be happy to entertain questions.